The gleam of armor, fluttering flags, beautiful ladies blessing their chosen ones before battle. This image of knightly tournaments is firmly entrenched in our minds thanks to romantic literature and cinema. However, historical reality was far more complex and prosaic. Medieval tournaments originated in the 11th century as harsh combat training, where knights honed their weapon skills in conditions close to real battle. Over time, these brutal contests evolved into elaborate ceremonial events with clear rules and a complex system of governance. From simple field exercises to grand court spectacles, tournaments underwent a long path of transformation, becoming a multifaceted socio-political phenomenon. Who, in reality, was behind the organization of these spectacular events? How were rules regulated and disputes resolved? What role did monarchs, heralds, and tournament societies play? And to what extent did the real code of chivalry correspond to the idealized image that has come down to us? The origins of knightly tournaments are rooted in the 11th century, when the first organized combat training began to take place on the fields of northern France. These early contests bore little resemblance to the refined ceremonies of the late Middle Ages. They were brutal, violent, and often ended in serious injury or even death for the participants. In essence, they were simulations of real battles, where knights could hone their combat skills in relatively controlled conditions. The first documented mention of a tournament dates back to 1066. The chronicler Geoffroy de Vigeois describes an event he called Conflictus Gallicus, Gallic contest. It is noteworthy that it was the French lands that became the cradle of the tournament tradition. The knight Geoffroy de Preuilly is considered by many historians to be the inventor of the formalized tournament, although this is likely an exaggeration. Rather, he was one of the first to begin introducing certain rules. In this early period, tournaments were large-scale field battles between two groups of knights. The territory for such contests was not limited by special barriers, but could encompass entire fields and even villages. Regulation was minimal. Striking from behind and attacking an already fallen opponent were forbidden, but even these simple rules were often violated in the heat of battle. The Church viewed these bloody amusements extremely negatively. Already in the 12th century, the Lateran Council forbade Christian burial for knights who died in tournaments. However, no prohibitions could stop the spread of this martial tradition. Tournaments gave young knights the opportunity to prove themselves, earn glory and trophies, and establish important social connections. Gradually, tournaments began to evolve. If initially they were simply chaotic skirmishes, by the end of the 12th century, the first elements of formalization appeared. Special zones for duels were introduced, safety rules began to form, and the first officials monitoring the order of the competitions emerged. Early 12th century tournaments were so dangerous that the Church repeatedly tried to ban them. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a bull declaring tournaments devilish festivities. Participants were denied Christian burial, and priests refused to give them last rites. These spiritual sanctions had an unexpected impact on the formation of the first written rules. Organizers sought to reduce mortality to avoid ecclesiastical wrath. Gradually, the chaos of early tournaments gave way to a more ordered system. By the beginning of the 13th century, the first documentary evidence of regulations appeared. Knights were forbidden to use certain types of weapons, strike in prohibited areas, or attack a fallen opponent. Violators could be stripped of the right to participate in future competitions, which for an ambitious knight was a serious blow to his reputation. Monarchs quickly realized that tournaments were not just entertainment, but a powerful political tool. In 1194, English King Richard the Lionheart first introduced a system of royal licenses for holding tournaments. Now, organizers had to obtain official permission from the crown and pay a substantial fee to the treasury. This allowed monarchs to control where, when, and who participated in tournaments, preventing potential conspiracies and rebellions. French King Philip Augustus went even further. He created special tournament districts with appointed royal observers. These officials monitored compliance with the rules and collected taxes from participants. Thus, tournaments transformed from spontaneous gatherings into state-regulated events. By the mid-13th century, the first specialized tournament arenas with fences and spectator stands appeared. This allowed for better control over the course of the competitions and reduced the risk of accidental casualties among the public. Simultaneously, the institution of professional judges, tournament marshals, was formed, whose word became law on the lists. It is interesting that many early rules were passed down orally through tradition. Knights learned tournament etiquette from their mentors, and the unwritten code of honor often held more weight than formal regulations. A breach of knightly ethics could permanently tarnish a participant's reputation, even if they did not violate official rules. Behind the flawless organization of medieval tournaments stood a special caste of professionals, heralds. These individuals were much more than mere criers announcing the names of participants. They were true guardians of chivalric tradition, masters of ceremonies, and unassailable authorities in matters of heraldry and genealogy. Without them, holding a tournament was as inconceivable as a coronation without a bishop. Heralds formed a complex hierarchical structure. At the lowest rung were the pursuivants, apprentices and assistants who studied the art of heraldry. Above them were the heralds themselves, specializing in certain regions or courts. This pyramid was crowned by the royal heralds and the chief herald of the kingdom, the King of Arms, who held an almost ministerial status. The training of a herald was a long and arduous process. A future master of ceremonies had to perfectly master heraldic science, learn hundreds of coats of arms and their blazons, descriptions, memorize the genealogies of all noble families in their region, and master complex ceremonial and etiquette. Many heralds began their careers as pages at courts, where they received basic education and then spent years traveling with senior mentors, gaining experience. During a tournament, heralds performed many critically important functions. They verified the genealogies of participants, preventing imposters and the unworthy from competing. It was the herald who could determine if a knight's lineage was noble enough to participate in a prestigious tournament. They also inspected the coats of arms on shields and horse caparisons, ensuring that no one appropriated another's heraldic symbols, a serious crime by the standards of the time. During duels, heralds acted as commentators and judges. They announced the names and titles of participants, explained the events on the lists to the public, recorded rule violations, and successful blows. After the completion of a bout, it was the herald who announced the victor and enumerated their achievements. Especially valuable was the herald's ability to unerringly identify knights by their coats of arms and mottos. In an era when the faces of participants were concealed by closed helmets, this skill was truly invaluable. A herald could determine at a glance who was before them, even if the knight attempted to remain incognito, which was often practiced at tournaments. Order at the lists was maintained by special officials, tournament marshals. These experienced knights or court officials possessed absolute authority during the competitions. Their word was law, and their decisions were not subject to appeal. Marshals were positioned on special elevated platforms around the perimeter of the field, from where they could observe all participants and instantly react to rule violations. The criteria for evaluating knights' performances were meticulously developed. In jousting duels, it was taken into account exactly where the blow landed. A hit to the center of the shield was valued higher than one to its edge. An important indicator of skill was considered to be maintaining balance in the saddle after a collision. Moreover, a lance broken against an opponent's armor yielded more points than just a blow that unseated a knight. In group competitions, the so-called buherts, marshals assessed the number of unseated opponents, captured horses, and prisoners. The ability to work cohesively with one's team was particularly valued. Judges also paid attention to the observance of the knightly code, nobility of conduct, absence of vile tricks, and courteous attitude towards opponents. The system of penalties for violations was strict and multi-tiered. For minor offenses, for example, initiating an attack before the herald's signal, a monetary fine was imposed. More serious violations, such as the use of forbidden weapons or striking an opponent's horse, were punished with temporary disqualification and public censure. The gravest offenses, intentional killing of an opponent, use of poisoned weapons, or sorcery, entailed complete expulsion from the knightly community. In such cases, heralds publicly tore the offender's coat of arms, their armor and weapons were confiscated, and their name was entered into special lists of the disgraced, which were read aloud at every subsequent tournament as a warning. Particularly interesting was the procedure for resolving disputed situations. When marshals could not reach a consensus, a court of honor was convened, comprising the most respected knights present at the tournament. Sometimes the decisive word remained with the ladies, the patrons of the tournament, whose opinion on matters of honor was considered indisputable. The relationship between monarchs and tournaments underwent a complex journey from open hostility to close symbiosis. In the early period, kings and the church viewed these gatherings of armed knights as a direct threat to public order. It was no coincidence that English King Henry II imposed a complete ban on tournaments in his domains. However, by the 13th century, monarchs realized that tournaments could be transformed from a source of danger into a powerful instrument of political influence. A turning point was the reign of Edward I of England, who not only lifted the bans, but himself became an active participant in and organizer of tournaments. Each such event became a demonstration of royal power and generosity. The monarch personally determined winners, presented awards, and bestowed favors upon those who distinguished themselves. This created a direct link between service to the crown and knightly valor. The system of royal licenses became a key mechanism for controlling the tournament tradition. Without a special permit, sealed with the royal seal, holding a tournament was considered illegal and punishable by huge fines. The license specified not only the place and time of the event, but also the list of admitted participants. This allowed monarchs to weed out politically unreliable knights and prevent gatherings of potential rebels. French King Philip IV the Fair perfected this system by creating in 1304 the Tournament Statute, the first full-fledged state document regulating all aspects of knightly contests. According to the statute, a royal governor with the authority to immediately cease the event at the slightest sign of disorder had to be present at every tournament. Monarchs also used tournaments to strengthen international ties. The famous Tournament of Chauvigny, organized in 1313, gathered knights from 7 kingdoms and became a platform for informal diplomatic negotiations. Inviting foreign knights to a royal tournament was considered a gesture of special favor and could precede the conclusion of important political alliances. Over time, tournaments transformed into complex symbolic spectacles where every detail carried a political undertone. The colors of the participants' attire, the choice of heraldic symbols, even the sequence of duels, all of this was carefully planned by monarchical advisors to convey specific messages to subjects and foreign guests. The tournament became not just entertainment, but a refined language of power, understood by the initiated. Medieval tournaments were not only spectacular events, but also serious financial undertakings. Beneath the gleam of armor and the blare of trumpets lay a complex economic system that made these costly events possible. Organizing a tournament required enormous expenses, building stands and fences, paying heralds and marshals, ensuring security, not to mention the prize fund and the celebratory banquets after the contests. The main sources of funding were the entry fees of participants. By the 15th century, these sums had become quite significant. A knight had to pay the equivalent of a half-year's income of an average landowner just for the right to enter the lists. For many less wealthy knights, this became an insurmountable barrier, leading to the formation of an elite circle of professional tournament fighters who could cover their expenses with prize winnings. Monarchs and wealthy aristocrats acted as the main sponsors of prestigious tournaments. For them, it was a profitable investment. By spending significant funds on organization, they received political dividends in the form of strengthening vassal loyalty and demonstrating their wealth. The French Duke Philip the Good, who organized the famous Bruges tournament in 1468, spent a sum equivalent to the annual budget of a small city, but gained a reputation as the most generous patron of chivalry in Europe. For host cities, tournaments became a real economic boon. Hundreds of knights with their retinues, thousands of spectators, all of them needed accommodation, food, and entertainment. The city authorities of Nuremberg calculated that a week-long tournament brought the city treasury an income comparable to quarterly tax revenues. It is not surprising that many cities competed for the right to host a prestigious competition, offering organizers benefits and subsidies. The prize fund of tournaments also evolved over time. While in the early period, the main trophies were the horses and weapons of defeated opponents, by the 14th century a system of monetary prizes and valuable gifts had formed. The winner of a major tournament could receive a gold chain, a precious cup, or even a landholding. Prizes personally awarded by the monarch were especially valued. They elevated a knight's social status more than their material worth. Economic aspects directly influenced the regulation of tournaments. High entry fees and valuable prizes required transparent rules and independent judging. Special tournament treasurers appeared, responsible for collecting fees and forming the prize fund. They kept detailed accounts, recording every cash flow, which made tournaments among the most financially organized events of the Middle Ages. By the 15th century, a special form of self-regulation had developed within European chivalry: tournament societies and guilds. These organizations became key institutions defining the standards for competitions and the conduct of their participants. Initially emerging as informal associations of like-minded knights, they quickly transformed into influential structures with complex hierarchies, statutes, and their own traditions. Tournament societies reached their peak in the German lands. The famous Society of the Ass, Gesellschaft mit dem Esel, founded in 1387, united knights of the Rhenish region. Its members wore a silver badge depicting an ass, a symbol of Christian humility and patience. The society had a strict statute regulating not only the rules for conducting tournaments, but also the daily behavior of knights, their attitude towards ladies, and their obligations to the church. No less influential was the Bavarian Society of the Unicorn, Gesellschaft vom Einkorn. whose statute from 1462 has survived to this day. The document details the procedure for admitting new members, the system of contributions and mutual assistance, as well as special tournament rules. It is noteworthy that the society admitted to its competitions only knights capable of proving noble descent through 4 generations. In France, similar organizations took the form of honorary brotherhoods, confréries d'honneur. The Parisian quote, founded by King John the Good, became the first knightly order directly associated with the tournament tradition. Its members swore an oath to participate annually in the royal tournament and to observe a special code of conduct, which included the obligation never to retreat more than 4 arpents, about 230 meters, in the face of an opponent. In England, tournament societies were more closely linked to city guilds. The London, quote, controlled the conduct of city tournaments and monitored the quality of participants' weaponry. Its members served as experts in resolving disputes over heraldic rights and genealogies. By the end of the 15th century, the society received a royal charter, granting it the sole right to organize tournaments within 20 miles of London. Tournament societies performed several crucial functions. Firstly, they standardized rules, creating a unified tournament space where knights from different regions could compete according to commonly understood norms. Secondly, they ensured the continuity of tradition, training young knights not only in combat skills, but also in the intricacies of etiquette. Thirdly, they acted as guarantors of fair judgment, appointing marshals and heralds of impeccable reputation from among their ranks. Medieval tournaments were not merely a display of knightly valor, but also technologically complex events with strict regulations regarding the equipment used. As tournaments evolved from deadly combat training to spectacular competitions, so too did the requirements for participants' weapons and armor. While in early 12th century tournaments, knights used the same equipment as in war, by the 15th century, a special class of tournament weaponry had formed, unfit for actual combat, but ideally suited for a safe and spectacular duel. The tournament lance had a blunt, crown-shaped tip with 3 or 4 prongs, allowing it to snag on an opponent's armor but not penetrate it. Shields were made of thin wooden planks that spectacularly shattered on impact, creating a dramatic effect without threatening the knight's life. The evolution of tournament helmets is particularly indicative, from ordinary combat helmets to special, quote, zero helms with thick walls and narrow eye slits, providing maximum head protection. Before each tournament, a thorough inspection of participants' equipment was conducted. This responsible task was performed by special officials, armorers, and tournament marshals. The inspection took place in several stages. First, master armorers examined each element of the armor for compliance with technical requirements: metal thickness, quality of joints, reliability of fastenings. Then, marshals checked the weapons, paying particular attention to lances. Their length and tip shape were strictly regulated. Finally, a fully equipped knight had to demonstrate mobility in his armor by performing several standard movements. Regulations varied significantly across different eras and regions. In 13th century France, the 3 nails rule applied. A sword could not have more than 3 rivets on its hilt, so that in case of blade breakage, the hilt would not turn into a dangerous bludgeoning weapon. In 15th century German lands, tournament armor had to withstand the hammer and chisel test. A master would deliver a standardized blow to a plate, and if a dent deeper than a certain measure was formed, the armor was not allowed for use. English regulations during the time of Edward IV required all sharp protrusions on armor to be covered with leather casings. Special attention was paid to the protection of horses, true co-authors of the tournament spectacle. Special breastplates and caparisons not only protected the animals from accidental blows, but also served as an element of heraldic design. By the 16th century, an entire industry for producing tournament equipment had formed. Workshops in Milan, Augsburg, and Toledo specialized in manufacturing armor that combined maximum safety with exquisite artistic design. Tournament garnitures included several types of helmets and breastplates, which the knight changed depending on the type of competition. In a world dominated by male warriors, women played a far more significant role in chivalric culture than is commonly believed. The traditional image of a lady in the stands, passively observing a tournament and presenting the victor with a scarf, only partially reflects historical reality. The influence of women on the tournament tradition was deep and multifaceted, transforming the very essence of the knightly ethos. The institution of the Lady of the Heart emerged in the 12th century as an integral element of courtly culture. A knight, entering the lists, fought not only for personal glory, but also in the name of his chosen lady, whose colors he wore on his armor. Chronicles describe how, before the start of a tournament, ladies would present their chosen knights with sleeves, veils, or other articles of clothing, favors, which served as a visible sign of patronage. This practice created a powerful motivation for knights to demonstrate not only physical prowess, but also moral qualities. However, the role of women was not limited to mere symbolic presence. In the 14th century, the institution of Queens of the Tournament was formed, noble ladies who were granted the right of final judgment in disputed situations. Their decisions were considered final and could not be appealed, even by the tournament marshals. Froissart's chronicles mention a tournament in London in 1368, where the Countess of Salisbury personally stopped a duel when she noticed that one of the knights had sustained a wound unnoticed by the judges. Even more surprising are the accounts of women as tournament organizers. Blanche of Castile, mother of the French King Louis IX, during her regency, organized a series of tournaments, personally determining their regulations and participants. She introduced the rule of the quote, 3, prohibiting strikes above a certain line on the opponent's shield, which significantly reduced fatalities in competitions. Margaret of Austria, ruler of the Netherlands in the early 16th century, created the first fully codified women's tournament charter. The document instructed knights, quote, 4, and introduced a system of fines for rude or inappropriate behavior. Violators were required to publicly apologize to the ladies and make donations to women's monasteries. Female influence transformed the very philosophy of tournaments, shifting the emphasis from a simple display of strength to ideals of gallantry and nobility. Under the influence of ladies, elements of theatricality entered the tournament tradition. Allegorical performances, poetic dedications, symbolic gestures. There is a known instance where, at a tournament in Bruges, ladies demanded that knights fight with one eye bandaged, as a sign that a true knight should be blind to the flaws of his lady. By the 15th century, a special genre of tournament literature had formed, books of ladies, containing rules of etiquette and instructions for women on how to properly evaluate knights' performances and what qualities should be encouraged. These texts, written by both men and women, shaped a unique female perspective on chivalric culture. Behind the glitter and grandeur of knightly tournaments also lay a dark side: scandals, conflicts, and breaches of the code of honor. Historical chronicles have preserved many accounts of how noble contests transformed into arenas for settling personal scores and displaying base passions. One of the most famous tournament scandals was the incident at the tournament in Chalon-sur-Saône in 1274, which went down in history as the Petite Guerre de Chalon, Small War of Chalon. What began as a friendly competition between English and French knights escalated into a genuine massacre, with dozens wounded and several dead. The French Count Robert d'Artois violated the rules, attacking an English knight after the signal to cease the fight, which provoked a mass brawl between the opposing sides. The consequences were severe. King Edward I personally intervened in the conflict and introduced new, stricter rules for conducting international tournaments, including the mandatory presence of neutral judges from third countries. No less illustrative is the case of the German knight Ulrich von Liechtenstein, who in 1227 was caught bribing judges at a tournament in Vienna. According to the chronicles, he paid the heralds to declare him the victor in a duel against the Bavarian knight Konrad von Winterstetten. When the deception was revealed, the punishment was harsh. Ulrich was stripped of his knighthood, his sword was publicly broken, and he was forbidden to participate in tournaments throughout the Holy Roman Empire. This incident led to the creation of a special oath for tournament judges, which they had to swear before each competition. Mechanisms for resolving conflicts between tournament participants were meticulously developed. For serious violations, a special court of honor was convened, consisting of the oldest and most respected knights. In 1389, at a tournament in Smithfield, such a court heard an accusation against Sir Thomas Holland, who allegedly used an enchanted amulet to win. After a 3-day deliberation, which included questioning witnesses and inspecting equipment, Holland was acquitted, and his accuser had to publicly apologize and pay a large fine for defamation. Violations related to heraldic rules were particularly strictly punished. In 1426, the French knight Jean de Melun appeared at a tournament in Arras with a coat of arms too similar to that of the Duke of Burgundy. This was regarded as an insult and an attempt to unlawfully appropriate the prestige of a noble family. The punishment was exemplary. De Melun was led to the center of the lists, where heralds publicly tore off his heraldic surcoat and trampled it. After this, the knight was forced to leave the tournament in simple clothes, without armor or weapons, which signified the extreme degree of dishonor. Tournament scandals often led to a tightening of rules. After a series of fatalities at German tournaments in the 14th century, the mandatory use of special blunt tips for lances, coronels, was introduced. A conflict between Burgundian and Flemish knights at a tournament in Ghent in 1432, which ended in a large-scale brawl, led to the rule of separating spectator stands by region to prevent clashes between fans. In medieval Europe, knightly tournaments were not a uniform phenomenon. Each region developed its own characteristics, rules, and traditions, reflecting local culture, political realities, and military needs. The French tournament tradition, considered the cradle of this phenomenon, was distinguished by a particular focus on spectacle and courtly etiquette. Here, the classical system of heralds and a detailed code of conduct for knights towards ladies were formed. French tournaments of the 15th century transformed into true theatrical performances with allegorical plots and complex symbolism. A distinctive feature was the obligatory presence of the Queen of the Tournament, a noble lady who had the right to make the final decision in disputed situations. The English tradition, on the other hand, maintained a more practical character. Tournaments in the British Isles remained training events for longer, with an emphasis on military skills. English monarchs more strictly controlled the conduct of tournaments through a system of royal licenses. A characteristic feature was the division of participants by territorial principle: North against South, East against West, which created an additional element of rivalry. English tournaments also had a more democratic character. Alongside aristocrats, wealthy townspeople and yeomen often participated, especially in archery competitions. The German tournament tradition stood out for its particular formalization of rules and strict requirements for the participants' lineage. By the 15th century, a complex system of tournament societies with their own statutes and rituals had formed here. German tournaments included unique types of contests, such as Quote 1, duels with blunt wooden maces instead of swords and lances. Special attention was paid to heraldic aspects. Before the tournament, a Quote 2 ceremony was held, a public inspection and approval of the participants' coats of arms by a special commission. The Italian tradition developed under the strong influence of urban culture. Unlike their northern neighbors, where tournaments were often held in rural areas, Italian contests were an integral part of city festivals. Here, permanent tournament arenas with stone stands and special barriers appeared earliest. Italian specificity manifested itself in a particular attention to the aesthetic side. Armor and horse equipment became true works of art, often created by famous artists. In Venice and Florence, tournaments included aquatic contests, nightly duels on boats and barges. Geographical factors significantly influenced local variations in rules. In the mountainous regions of Scotland and Switzerland, tournaments were often held on foot rather than on horseback. In the coastal regions of the Mediterranean, unique naval tournaments emerged, where knights fought on specially constructed platforms above the water. Climatic conditions also dictated their own rules. In northern countries, the tournament season was shorter and occurred in summer, whereas in Spain and southern Italy, winter tournaments were a common occurrence. By the mid-15th century, nightly tournaments began to undergo a radical transformation. Martial contests, where knights demonstrated their military skills, gradually gave way to theatrical performances with elaborate scenarios and deep symbolism. This evolution reflected changes in society itself. Firearms rendered traditional knightly weaponry obsolete on the battlefield, and the courtly culture of the Renaissance demanded more refined forms of entertainment. The tournament transformed from military training into an aristocratic spectacle. The Burgundian court became the main center of this transformation. Duke Philip the Good and his son Charles the Bold organized tournament spectacles of unprecedented luxury. The famous Feast of the Pheasant, held in 1454, included not only traditional duels, but also complex allegorical scenes depicting the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. Knights acted as mythological characters, and their duels were part of the overall dramatic design. Managing such complex events required new administrative structures. If previously the key figures in organizing tournaments were heralds and marshals, responsible for enforcing rules and identifying participants, now stage directors came to the forefront. Special positions such as masters of entertainment and directors of festivities appeared at courts. These individuals, often with experience in theatrical arts, developed the overall concept of the tournament, wrote scripts, and coordinated the work of numerous assistants. Set designers became indispensable participants in tournament preparation. Leonardo da Vinci, serving at the Sforza court in Milan, created fantastic mechanisms and decorations for nightly festivities. His notebooks contain sketches of moving platforms simulating sea waves on which knights conducted naval battles in the center of the palace hall. Albrecht Dürer designed costumes for the tournaments of Emperor Maximilian I, combining historical elements with fantastic details. Technical specialists, Engineers, pyrotechnicians, mechanics formed a separate category of tournament personnel. They created complex special effects, artificial lightning, movable decorations, mechanical dragons, and unicorns. The tournament arena transformed into a true stage with trapdoors, hoisting mechanisms, and lighting effect systems. Tournament scenarios became increasingly literary and symbolic. Often, they were based on popular chivalric romances or allegories with political undertones. A tournament organized by English King Henry VIII in 1520 enacted a scene from the legend of King Arthur, where the monarch personally played the role of the legendary ruler. This allowed for historical parallels and emphasized the continuity of power. The economics of tournaments also changed. If previously the main expenses were prizes for winners and payment for heralds, now the lion's share of the budget went to decorations, costumes, and special effects. Financial documents from the court of Francis I show that 5 times more funds were spent on the staging of the 1526 tournament than on prizes for participants. Despite the theatricalization, the element of competition remained. Knights still demonstrated their skill, but the criteria for evaluation changed. Now, not only strength and accuracy of blows were valued, but also artistry, adherence to the performed role, and grace of movement. Judges, among whom poets and artists increasingly appeared, evaluated the performance as an artistic whole. With the development of tournament culture, there arose a need to systematize rules and traditions. By the 15th century, special treatises dedicated to the organization of tournaments and knightly conduct appeared, veritable encyclopedias of the noble art. These texts not only recorded existing rules, but also shaped new standards that spread throughout Europe. One of the most influential authors was René of Anjou, titular king of Naples and Sicily. In 1460, he created the monumental work Treatise on the Form and Arrangement of Tournaments, which became a true Bible for organizers of knightly contests. René meticulously described all aspects of tournament preparation and execution, from the placement of tribunes to the form of invitations, from the duties of heralds to the order of awarding victors. Especially valuable were his illustrations, showing the correct posture of a knight in the saddle during various maneuvers. No less significant was the earlier work by the French knight Geoffroy de Charny, the Book of Chivalry. Written in the 14th century by a veteran of the 100 Years' War, it combined practical advice on conducting a duel with profound reflections on the knight's moral code. De Charny created a hierarchy of knightly achievements, where tournament victories ranked below exploits in real warfare, but above court intrigues and romantic conquests. In the German lands, Georg Ruxner's Turnierbuch, created at the beginning of the 16th century, enjoyed particular authority. This work was distinguished by a pedantic approach to questions of lineage. The author asserted that only knights capable of proving noble descent for 8 generations should be admitted to tournaments. Ruxner compiled a list of 36 tournament families of Germany, whose representatives had the hereditary right to participate in prestigious competitions. The Spanish tradition enriched European tournament literature with Pedro Núñez de Lara's treatise Doctrina de Caballeros, where special attention was paid to the aesthetic side of duels. The author developed a system for evaluating the grace of a knight's performance, including such criteria as the harmony of movements, the expressiveness of gestures, and even the melodiousness of the sound made by armor in motion. The spread of printed books in the 15th century contributed to the standardization of tournament rules across Europe. While previously each region developed its own traditions, now the treatises of René of Anjou and other authorities created a unified space of knightly culture. A knight from Provence could participate in a tournament in Bohemia, knowing that the main rules would be familiar to him. The legacy of medieval knightly tournaments is astonishingly alive in the modern world. Although centuries have passed since the last knight broke a spear in the lists, the organizational principles of those contests continue to shape the modern sporting landscape and ethical norms. Looking at the structure of modern sports competitions, we find surprising parallels with the medieval tournament system. The role of judges, overseeing the observance of rules, directly derives from tournament marshals. Modern sports arbitrators, like their medieval predecessors, possess absolute authority on the field. Their decisions are final and not subject to appeal. The system of yellow and red cards in football remarkably resembles the gradation of punishments at tournaments, from a warning to complete disqualification. Even the institution of video replays can be seen as a modern version of the tournament council, which convened to resolve disputed situations. The heraldic system of participant identification has transformed into modern sports uniforms with numbers and team emblems. Like medieval coats of arms, they allow for instant recognition of athletes and their affiliations. Tournament societies found their continuation in sports federations and committees, which establish unified rules and standards. The International Olympic Committee, in a sense, is the heir to those very knightly guilds that regulated tournaments in different countries. The tournament legacy is particularly evident in the ceremonial aspect of modern sports. The solemn opening of the Olympic Games with a parade of participating countries, the raising of flags, and the lighting of the flame directly echoes the ceremony of presenting knights before a tournament. Even the Olympic oath of athletes and judges has roots in the knightly oath before a contest. But perhaps the most important legacy of knightly tournaments is the concept of sports ethics and fair play. The notion of fair play, so valued in modern sports, is a direct descendant of the knightly code of honor. The idea that competition must be conducted according to rules, that victory achieved dishonestly has no value, that respect for the opponent is as important as the pursuit of victory. All this came to us from the era of tournaments. Even the ritual handshake between athletes before and after a match dates back to the knightly greeting before a duel. Modern disciplinary committees investigating cases of unsportsmanlike conduct apply the same principles as medieval courts of honor. Public censure, fines, temporary suspension, and complete disqualification. The arsenal of sanctions has remained virtually unchanged since the 15th century. The economic model of modern professional sports has also inherited much from the tournament tradition. The system of sponsorship, prize funds, commercial use of symbols, all of this had prototypes in medieval contests. Even modern sports journalism can trace its roots to tournament chronicles kept by heralds.